As Christians, we should be nice and meek people. That's what the Bible says, right? But what do you do if people start taking advantage of that? When they use you and when you are suddenly becoming the doormat for everyone? That's today's topic here at 21st Talks. I'm Vince and I'm here with Phil, and we want to talk about the meek Christian. Where do I draw the line? So Phil, tell me a little bit more about, your view on meekness and also weakness. What does that have to do with us on a daily basis? Like maybe I know you have a story that you wanted to share at the beginning that illustrates that really well. Like, how do we deal with that as being a Christian and being meek or not meek at the same time?
Yeah, sure. So, I have an example from my own life that kind of demonstrates, I guess, the balance between meekness and weakness. I was working as a patent attorney at a previous firm, and one day I asked a paralegal to tell me file something on Monday. I believe it was Thursday, and she snapped back and said, "No, like, this is my client. I want to file it before the weekend, and this is what we're going to do." And she went on and on and on, demanding that we do things her way. Now, as a paralegal, she doesn't really have a client. The clients are managed by attorneys, right? So I know that, but
yeah.
It was really out of pocket for her to say that. And mind you, I didn't.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I didn't scream at her. I wasn't rude. It was just simple, like, "Hey, like, can you help me, do this?" And I think she was just having a bad day. So she said what she said, and then she just stormed out the room. And I was just a little bit flabbergasted because I was just like, what just happened? One, and two, how do I actually handle this in a way that is professional and Christ-like?
Yeah, that's the thing, man. And let's just go. Actually, let's take that situation right now and let's go through a scenario. Like, what if you had told her? Did you tell her anything? Let's just go to that first scenario. You don't tell her anything. You just let that sink in, and you just basically don't do anything about that. Is that something you recommend? And if not, why not?
Yeah, so I don't recommend that, and partially because I believe in a great axiom of human life, and that's that we teach people how to treat us, right? So if I had let her get away with that, then she would, in her mind, know that I'm her punching bag.
Oh, yeah.
Whenever she's having a bad day, she can just come in there and say whatever she wants to say. She can essentially boss me around, and I'd have to do things when she wanted to. And not only would that be a bad precedent on a personal level, but it was my license. If something happens and there's malpractice, I'm the one that's going to lose my job, not her. So on both a personal level and a professional level, not saying anything would have taught her that it would be okay to treat me like that moving forward.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool, man. But what about the thing that you then, I guess, could have done? What is the right thing to do in that situation?
Well, so the right thing to do, it's what I did. So I thought about, okay, maybe I could, I could have retorted right then and there and screamed back at her and got into a fight. And I figured that wasn't the right, the right way of handling it. So essentially what I did, I sat back and I emailed my partner and I said, "Hey, this is what happened. I don't appreciate it. And, I'd like you to, give me advice on how to handle this." And essentially, it became a confrontation. We had to sit down and we had to talk with her. And essentially I let her and, partner know how I felt. And I drew my line in the sand, like, as a professional, I'm not going to stand for this. And this is my line. So that's how I chose to handle it. And I think it was a good balance of, not being reactionary in the moment, like just screaming back at her, but also it was a measured approach. It was like, "Hey, like, I'm not going to stand for this. And this is my line. These are my personal boundaries."
Yeah, man, really good. But that's actually a pretty nice way to handle it. But, we have these Bible verses, where it's, Matthew 5:39, where Jesus says, we shouldn't resist evil. We should also turn the other cheek to that person that hits us on the right cheek, right? So what do you do with that verse, man? How do you do? Does that now mean that you have to actually swallow what the paralegal, told you? Or what does that mean for you?
Yeah, that's something I've really battled with, to tell you the truth. And I mean, to be honest, there have been times where I've allowed people to do stuff to me, and I've kind of just said, "Oh yeah, I'm pleasing God because I'm being meek." But as I've done more research on the topic, I realized that in John 18 verses 22 to 23, when Jesus was going through the trial, and the Bible says that one of the officers standing by Jesus struck Jesus with his hand.
Oh yeah.
And it was crazy, because apparently, the officer said, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" He was upset at Jesus. And Jesus turned to him and said, "Listen, if what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong I've said. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me?" So, I mean, it's kind of crazy because it's like the same Jesus that says turn the other cheek is also the same Jesus that basically was like, "Yo, dude, like, why did you hit me? Like, I didn't do anything wrong," right?
And that's in the middle of the trial. Like, you have to imagine that's the same Jesus that just went through Gethsemane and that just, prayed for his disciples and the world and all that stuff. And he was basically on a tour. He was on a roll of just letting people use him, but that was a different purpose. That was a different goal. Now, someone comes in right now and he says that, and Jesus is like, "Wait a minute. Did I do anything wrong, right? If I did something wrong, okay, but I did something right. So what are you doing?"
Yeah, it's very striking, and I think it's important that when we're studying any topic in the Bible that we look at all the verses and stories that talk about it in order to get a balanced view. But I'm kind of curious as to your personal boundary lines, like when it comes to meekness and stuff. How do you view it?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. I do think that it's something that many people struggle with. At least that's something that I was struggling with. Like, where do I personally draw the line? Do I want to be the doormat? I was just thinking about my brother, right? I have a younger brother, and he's pretty cold when it comes to these things. Like, he can just straightly say, "No, like, I'm not doing this," or "No, I won't be there," or "No, like, don't talk to me like that," or something like that, So, and me, on the other hand, I'm just like, yeah, okay, I'll do it, or yeah. And so I kind of struggle with that. But I felt like, especially in the last couple of like weeks and months, meekness for me personally means to be teachable in a way that I respect what others are saying if it's right. So, for example, let's take that example of the paralegal story, right, that you mentioned. This did not happen the way I'm telling you it right now, but let's just assume that the paralegals, I don't know, she told you something that you were doing wrong, and the way she did it was really not nice at all, but the actual content of what she was saying was correct. Then in this case, you could have said, "Okay, well, I want to be a meek person. I want to be teachable. So yeah, I respect you. I respect the way, not the way, but the thing that you said. I do not respect the way you said it. So maybe there's some correction on that, but at least I'm teachable," right? So that's meekness for me. But then with two things on the side, first thing would be you have to stand up for what's right? I mean, you look at Jesus, you look at Moses, meekest man on earth. You look at even like other leaders in the Bible, like Nehemiah. Those were people who stood up for what is right. So I believe that you need to do that. And in your example, I mean, you kind of stood up for what was right. When it comes to your business relationship and your client relationship and all that stuff. And that's the first thing, stand up for what's right for me. And then also protect myself. Because if I am the doormat for everyone, then I don't feel like that I can, there has to be a protection on the physical, on the mental, and also on the spiritual aspect so that, people are not using me and using me and using me. But, that's kind of where I stand right now. But
Yeah.
I was actually interested in looking up some definitions. I don't know if you have anything on that, man. Like just meekness. What does the internet say?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's a definition by John MacArthur that I love, and it says, "Meekness is gentleness and mildness and a subdued character, but it is not weakness. It is power under control."
Wow.
Right. And that's such a beautiful definition because, like, when you think about Jesus, it's like he's the embodiment of all power, omnipotence.
Yeah.
But
power
under control.
Right?
Yeah. So, and there's another definition by Warren Wiersbe, which says, in Jesus' day, the word meek was used to describe a gentle breeze, a pleasant medicine, or a colt that had been broken. So it's both pleasant, but it's also powerful at the same time, right? A gentle breeze is what powers a windmill, right? It's not a tornado or hurricane that powers it. It's just normal breeze, right? But it's so powerful. So I think it's a beautiful, beautiful definition.
I like that, man. I like that. Yeah, that's true. Okay, what about people who who are, I mean, you and I, we know that, we have a pretty similar personality type, but what about other people and their personality types and meekness? Like, I know that there are people who say, I want to be meek or I am meek, and they're kind of confusing things a little bit. Like, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I love the human psychology aspect of our Christian walk, and this is like one of the best topics to kind of address with it, because I like the Myers-Briggs personality test, and if you haven't taken it, you can take it online for free. But I'm an ESTJ. You can look it up, see what that means. But essentially, my personality type is not conflict averse at all. So like, if there's something that needs to be confronted, I'll confront it. And like you
address it right away.
Yeah, I'm gonna attack it right away. Right, over the years, I've become a little bit more mature, and that like my response is a little bit more delayed and measured, as you saw in the paralegal situation. But there are other personality types that literally hate conflict. Like, they're so conflict averse. And
what do they do then if they hate conflict and there's a conflict? What do they do?
They just bury it. They bury it. They internalize it. And what's dangerous about that is when you allow people to do things without saying a word, you become a ticking time bomb, and you harbor these malicious thoughts. And essentially, you teach people how to treat you, and it's going to continue to happen until you explode, right? So question, is that meekness then? Like, to just eat everything that people are giving you? Not at all. And that's the thing. That's what we have to be careful about, because I've experienced this in my life, where people who are literally pushovers try to baptize their personality weakness by saying, "Oh, this is meekness," and it's not. It absolutely is not.
Oh man, that's deep. Yeah, that's true though. I mean, I know people who are, like that, or who tend to be like that, and yeah, it's not healthy. And you look at Jesus. Like, look at our example that we found. I mean, when there were things to address, he addressed it, right? I mean, the most important thing, which was his crucifixion, how many times did he address it, right? I mean, with his disciples, there are things, if there's conflict coming up, if there's something between you and me, it's not really healthy to just say, "Oh, I'm a meek person, so I'm just going to draw back now, and I'm just going to, do my own thing or whatever." So
I totally agree.
Yeah, that's true.
I totally agree. And on the flip side, people that are more assertive in their personality types or argumentative, it's important for us to not just point to the story in the Bible where it's like Jesus, throws over stuff in the temple and say, well, Jesus, was assertive and showed anger at times, So like, the point is that we have to understand our personal biases. Like, who am I outside of what the Bible has to say, right? And then you approach the Bible with who you are, so that you can understand, if you're over spiritualizing something or not.
That's true.
And I think it's particularly important for this topic of meekness.
Yeah. Two more things I want to add to this, actually. Especially when you start talking about anger, I do think that when it comes to anything that has to do with revenge, the Bible is very clear about that. Like, okay, we do want to stand up for what is right, but nothing that has to do with revenge should be our cup of water or whatever, because I believe that, the Bible says vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, right? Punishment, that's with God, and so we shouldn't be taking care of that, because we know that God is taking care of that. That's the first thing. And then the second thing, I found a really beautiful quote, actually, just looking up some not definitions like you did, but kind of like talking about Christ and his meekness. And there's one author, Ellen White, she talks about in her book, Thoughts from the Mount of Blessing, on page 14, she says that, his divine majesty and his meekness and humility, he had that, and it was attractive to all. It was basically attracting everyone to himself. That's what she says. Okay. So I was just reading and I was like, man, a meekness that attracts people to you. Like, isn't that something that we should aim for? Isn't that something that would be good to have? Like, not something that would, make you feel like you're the doormat now, but something where people say, okay, this person is different, but in a good way.
Yeah. And that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. And I think what makes people have that reaction is when they see the power that you have, like when they know that you can react.
Oh yeah.
Like they know that
and then you control it, right? That's what you talked about. Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing. Like when a parent can snap back at his or her child and he just or she just says, hey, talks in a calm voice. You have all control over, your 10-year-old kid. You can send them to their room, you can take their money, you can do whatever. But it's like you decide to act in a measured and mild way. And that is really attractive because you can, but you don't.
Yeah, you're right. Oh, yeah, nice, man. Wrapping up, I do think that we should draw a line when it comes to meekness. I do think that, it has something to do with being teachable, and meekness essentially is the opposite of pride. So when we actually think about that, when you think about knowledge or light that comes to us, and we want to make sure that we receive it, we do want to lay every pride aside, and we want to humbly accept it and be teachable. But then on the other side also, we want to make sure that we stand up for what's right. We want to protect ourselves. And what you said also, man, is really important. We have to draw the line, and we have to say, okay, personality flaws are not meekness. Okay, so that's something where we have to just live a balanced life when it comes to these things. Yeah, and I believe that a perfect example, as always, is Jesus. Also many other characters in the Bible, but eventually you want to look to Jesus. You want to see how he treated people, and I believe that when we look at the power that Jesus had and how he controlled it, that's the true definition of meekness right there, and that's what we should be looking for.
Exactly, because ultimately Jesus calls us to meekness, not weakness.